I am happy to introduce our guest, Rachel, or Dr. Cali, as is known at camp. Who I'll let her introduce herself, but she has a lot of great information, tips, and all the questions you wonder about when you're traveling, answers to those questions. So I'm excited for this session, and I will pass it along to her without further ado.
Awesome. Thanks, Kendra and Rob. I am equally excited about this session. I think this is probably one of my favorite topics, traveling with type 1. My hope is that this will be pretty interactive, where we can share experiences and I can learn from you guys as well. Some tips for my patients and myself. I've had type 1 diabetes for about 20 years, and I've traveled internationally a few times and in the States. And I remember kind of my first time going to the airport, there was kind of some fears of the unknown. And so my hope is if anyone's in that position that we can kind of alleviate those fears and empower you and give you kind of all the information that we have. As a disclaimer, some of the information I have is anecdotal from my own experience. I did do a lot of kind of looking through the literature as well. So we have kind of the most up-to-date information, and really kind of, again, the most important part is always consulting with your own provider because they might have some specifics based on where you're going and kind of your stage of your diabetes. So as we kind of, the old adage says, one of the most important things to do is be prepared. So today's preparation is tomorrow's success. People with type 1 diabetes can go anywhere, can do anything. Just need a few strategies and a few things kind of behind your belt so that you are going to be successful for your trip. And I included this photo of my husband and I from our honeymoon a few years ago. We went to Capri, Italy. I had my T-Slim pump on. You can't see it because it was freezing, as well as my Dexcom G6. And so went through customs, did everything, and it was a successful trip. All right. So you'll notice that this talk is kind of broken up into pre-trip preparation, what to expect when you get to the airport, a little bit of information about time zones, and then once you're on land, kind of what are some tips and tricks that we have. And at the end, I really would love to hear from all you guys and see if we have any additional questions. So the first thing that I would suggest is letting your diabetes provider know well in advance that you're going on a trip, especially if it's international. Why is that? Well, one of the most important things is prescriptions. We'll get into this a little bit, but nothing's worse than thinking you had that old vial of Lantus in the fridge and you go and check and it's not there, or maybe it's expired and it's the day before a trip. So kind of having those prescriptions ready, getting a travel letter is another thing to consider, especially for international travel. Creating what I like to call a diabetes document, and I'll have an example for you. And reviewing the carry-on checklist, because again, preparation is key. More is better in this scenario. So the first thing is the prescription tips for travel. So ensure that your prescriptions are current and they're filled. That's one of the most important things. And then obtaining a copy of your current prescription and medications is really important, especially if you're going internationally, because in the event that you ran out of insulin, you'll then have your information to provide for a pharmacy. As a general kind of rule of thumb, when you're thinking about what's over the counter, generally your blood glucose test strips and glucometer, you can purchase those, ketone strips, glucose tablets, some syringes, but generally needing a prescription, especially in the United States, we know insulin, glucagon, and then our insulin pump and CGM supplies. I will say some countries in Europe, you can get insulin over the counter, but again, just kind of keeping this mental model of what are some things that we need to be prepared for. This is an example travel letter. Your physician does not need to follow this specific guidance, but essentially it says that the child has type 1 diabetes. These are the medications they use, and that they're going to need to carry them on their person for successful travel. So having something like that available in the event that you need it. In the last, I would say probably 10 years, I haven't had to show any type of documentation, but I still have my letter from my physician. And recently, when I did go to Italy, I had them kind of renew it because it had been a little bit old. So the diabetes document that I was talking about, this is basically like a list that includes all of your diabetes medications and doses. Why is this important? I get many calls as an overnight provider from families who are unfortunately in a situation where the pump fails and they're like, what do we do? What are our backup doses. So this is going to really equip you to have that information before you are traveling. So here on the left, I have kind of a general, if your child is wearing an insulin pump, kind of getting the settings written down.
Good idea, huh?
You can take a picture if you want. You can write it down. You could even print it out. But again, having all of that information, so that's available for you. And then here I have like an idea of a pump backup plan. So again, this is an important thing to discuss with your provider. Hey, if my child's insulin pump isn't working, what would their long-acting dose be? And so knowing that ahead of time will equip you in the event that the pump unfortunately might fail. And so again, having all of that information available to you. And then packing for the trip. This is kind of an old photo, but I feel like it was nice to visually see. There's a lot of stuff that you have to think about. And the American Diabetes Association and most of kind of the travel agencies dealing with people who have type 1 diabetes say, pack at least twice the amount of supplies that you think that you need. I'll be honest, I go overboard. I do about 3 times, sometimes even more than that, because the idea is you want to be prepared. The other really important thing is that you need to carry your diabetes supplies on person in your carry-on at all times. Why is that? Well, there's a few reasons. One, if your luggage gets lost, then you don't have your supplies. So that's not a great scenario. The second is in the airplane itself with the cabin pressure changes and temperature changes, insulin is not going to possibly withstand those changes. And so it's important to kind of keep that in mind. And the third is if you're in the airport security and you go low, you need to have low supplies. So there's a lot of reasons supporting the fact that you need to carry your supplies on your person at all times. So what supplies should I pack? I like to, when I'm preparing for a trip, sit back and think, what does a day of diabetes look like? Maybe even a week. And what are the supplies that I'm using to kind of manage my diabetes on a daily basis? I created this list, which intentionally is very long because I think it kind of really shows there's a lot of things that we have to think about. And so you can see on the left, I have an idea of like a 5-day trip. So diabetes medications and supplies. So having that short acting and that long acting insulin for people who are on shots as well as pumps, having all of the supplies for your pump. So if you've got the T-Slim or the Omnipod, having all the things that you need for that. Thinking about a cooling pack if you're going somewhere warm. So like the Frio cooling pack, we'll talk a little bit about that one. A sharps container, a pump charger. I was talking with Rob, whose daughter is going abroad. You need an adapter, right? If you're trying to plug in your pump and you can't use those outlets, you might need a pump adapter. So that is also really important to think about. Phone chargers, barrier creams, supplies to treat your lows, supplies to be able to check your blood sugar. We love our CGMs, but what if they're not working? Having a glucometer as a backup. So again, just really thinking about kind of what do we need and what will be our backups is really helpful. I have this slide, and actually I did a talk on this exact topic when I was a medical student, so quite a while ago. And one of the things we really want to talk about is thinking about emergencies abroad. And so really kind of emphasizing having a medical ID bracelet or some type of identification that says, hey, we have type 1 diabetes in the event that you need some extra assistance. One of the things that I think is really kind of cool, and a lot of the ADA and a lot of the groups recommend is if you are going to another country, learning how to say, I have diabetes and sugar or orange juice, please, in the language of the country could be helpful in the event that you're in an emergency. And then determining healthcare coverage changes if you leave the state, that's applicable in the United States as well as abroad. And then considering contacting the Visitors Bureau internationally to see if there's any local pharmacies or hospitals in the event that you need some help. And then also just in the United States, having a list of your diabetes provider as well as those contact numbers for your diabetes devices can also be quite helpful. So now we've packed for our trip, we're at the airport, and we are now dealing with airport security. My experience has actually been quite pleasant. I feel like TSA has really kind of taken it upon them to really learn about type 1 diabetes and seem to really be kind of aware of devices, has been my experience. But this is information specifically from their site that they recommend that people with type 1 diabetes follow when at the airport. So the first one was notifying TSA of medical devices and equipment before kind of going through security. How I do it, I wear the T-Slim, I just kind of raise it up and I go, I've got a pump, And it kind of then flags them to say, okay, we are going to probably maybe be doing some alternate screening. You can have an optional disability notification card. I've personally never used it, and I don't know of any of my patients that have, but I'll show you that in a few slides that they have made available, that it's basically a discrete way of handing them a card that says, I have type 1 diabetes. I'm going to need an alternate type of screening. They say to bring solid foods and glucose tablets, though you can bring liquid. You can bring past the 3.4 ounces of juice, but it will undergo extra screening. So just kind of keeping that in mind. It might just be simpler to have some hard candies or some glucose tablets. And then they recommend separating your items from the luggage, basically in like a clear plastic bag or container, and then declaring those items if they are undergoing visual inspection. I would say in the last like 5 to 10 years, I've had my insulin and syringes go through the x-ray machine and I haven't had anyone pull it, but that's not to say that that won't happen. All right. So practical tips for airport security. So I actually put these images at the top because when I was doing some research thinking about what are the x-ray machines versus the whole body scanners versus the metal detectors, I had to really kind of visualize that. So when we're thinking about it. And so what we need to know is that insulin is safe to go through the x-ray scanner. So that's the guy in the middle where you're putting your bag on there and it's going through. Medical devices do not need to be disconnected. So if for whatever reason you have your tubed pump and you don't want to disconnect it, you don't have to. So keeping that in mind, but you can. Passengers can always request screening by pat down rather than going through the scanners. So knowing that that's always an option. Not all pumps are safe to go through the x-ray scanner per the regulations of the pump. So we'll talk through which ones are safe and which ones are not and why that's the case. And then if you do have your pump, knowing that they will generally have you touch it, swab your hands to make sure there's no explosive material. And that takes about a few seconds while they do that, but keeping that in mind that that's pretty standard. And I'm at the point now where I've traveled so much that I just take my pump and I start doing this and like, all right, you know what's up. And I'm like, yep. And then I put my hands out. So it kind of becomes just a part of the travel experience. So I made this slide because I realized there are a lot of devices, and this is not probably even including all of them. And there are lots of different recommendations from the companies. As a general rule of thumb, Dexcom G7 and Omnipod, you are free to go through whatever. There are no regulations there. Dexcom G6, just probably because they haven't tested it yet, says not to go through the x-ray or the whole body scanner. You can see that Freestyle Libre, you are okay to go through the x-ray, but not the whole body scanner. And then T-Slim is one that also says no x-ray, no whole body scanner, but you're fine to go through the metal detector. So kind of just keeping these regulations in mind. And at the end of the talk, I think Rob will send out some links. Each site will have their own kind of information. So if you ever kind of forget or you want to look and do it yourself, each pump and CGM manufacturer will tell you kind of their rules. This is from Tandem's site itself, where basically if you ever wanted to print this, you could. And it basically tells TSA, like, this is an insulin pump. This is what it can and can't do as far as screening. So you'd have that available to you. And this is that optional disability card that the TSA provides. Again, if you just go online, you can print it if you are interested. And it essentially just says, I have a health condition or medical device that may affect screening. And so knowing that you still will be screened, but maybe needing an alternate type of screening. All right, so crossing time zones. This is actually a very complicated topic, but we're going to keep it really kind of just to the basics. And again, if you are traveling many time zones and you're on basal bolus or injections, talking with your provider is important to kind of come up with a plan. But as a general rule of thumb, eastward travel, you're going to have a shortened day. And so you may require less insulin. So you may, see more frequent kind of lows possibly for the first day while acclimating, or maybe you won't be affected much. Westward travel, longer day, may require more insulin. And again, this is kind of going over multiple time zones. Insulin injections. So when thinking about basal insulin, the general rule of thumb we've learned is 24 hours. So setting an alarm is one option on the phone to kind of meet that 24-hour mark. And you can always move your dose about 3 to 4 hours either which way. But again, my recommendation would be if you're going multiple time zones and worried about that, talking with your provider for a nice plan. Insulin pumps have made it a lot easier. You can just change the local time generally, but remembering that, everyone's basal rates may be slightly different. And so it's not surprising to maybe experience a little bit of hyperglycemia, a little bit of hypoglycemia when acclimating, can be expected. So now we're on land. So what to expect? So this is one of my favorite things that I discovered when I was going to Australia, because I was talking with mom and she was like, I'm very worried that your insulin is going to get too hot. And so we learned about this Frio cooling pack. And so it's basically this cotton-based insulation surrounded by like a pack of crystals, and you get it wet. And basically it will maintain a cool temperature for about 45 hours. And it's really useful if you're participating in activities where like insulin can overheat. And I was talking with Rob, I think he's used it as well. And I think I probably have one in my fridge too, if people want to see it. But again, a pretty cool thing that can be utilized. And then one of the things that I think is worth discussing, which was always my biggest fear and still probably is what if I run out of insulin? In the United States, I feel like it's a little bit easier to navigate, but what if I'm in like a different country? When I was in, for example, Italy, it was a fear of mine. And in preparation for this talk, I realized that we nowadays have AI and Chat GPT, which actually is quite helpful. And I wanted to give like a little anecdote. Before kind of creating this slide, typed into Chat GPT, I have type 1 diabetes. I am in Barcelona, Spain, and I am out of insulin. What do I do? And it generated multiple pharmacies that were 24 hours and they were open that carried insulin. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But if we're going to be old school, I have some other ideas as well. My first thing is please do not panic. There are lots of ways that you can get insulin. But the most important thing I think from this slide is you can always go to emergency department, especially if it's midnight. You are on your last vial and you realize, oh no, my blood sugars are high. My child needs insulin. What do I do? You can always go to emergency department. But if it's during the day and you've got some time, you can find a local pharmacy. Many countries have pharmacies that carry insulin and you don't always need a prescription. Some have international locations. I think CVS and Walgreens are two of them that may be able to transfer prescriptions. You can always visit the local doctor or hospital. And if you need that prescription, they can kind of tell you where to go as far as being able to meet with that doctor and pick that up. You can also check with your embassy or consulate. I was reading that a lot of times they'll have a list of English-speaking physicians who might be able to help you navigate and get that prescription. You can also ask the hotel or local contacts. They might have some information regarding kind of where to go next. And then one of the ones that I really liked was using an online diabetes community. I was reading a blog and there was a gentleman, I think he was in Argentina, and he had typed in kind of trying to figure out if there was a group, and there was actually a local group that was able to help him with some supplies. So I thought that was kind of an interesting approach as well. And then a quick note about insulin strength, although, and again, preparing for this talk, I realized this is probably not as applicable as it used to be, is thinking about the strength of insulin that we have in the United States versus possibly different ones in other countries. Again, what I was learning is that U40 insulin is actually more used in veterinarian practice now than other countries, but still worth pointing out. So in the United States, our insulins are, most of them are U100, which means that for every 1 ml of liquid, there are 100 units of insulin. In some countries, there's a possibility that they'd have U40, which is not as concentrated, so a little bit more kind of dilute compared to what we have. And so really the main takeaway is that if you are getting a more dilute insulin, you need the appropriate syringe that matches it, because in that scenario, you can still use the same kind of units that you typically do. But if you match a concentrated insulin with a syringe that's not the same concentration, you can have varying dose discrepancies. So I bring it up. I hope it's never going to be a thing, but just keeping in mind, if you're getting a prescription in another country, making sure it's that U100. And if it's not, then making sure that you have the appropriate syringes. And then this was from an article that we had written. I'm going to skip past that, just kind of giving some math, which we do not need to do right now, if that ever happened. So bottom line, this is my last slide. I think checking in with your diabetes team early is super important, would be highly recommended. Doing your research ahead of time, packing a lot, 2 to 3 times what you think you need, preparing for the unexpected, but truly the most important thing is having fun and knowing that people with type 1 diabetes can travel. They are not limited by that, but just need a little bit extra preparation. And so now I want to kind of open it up to any tips and tricks, any questions. If it's okay with everyone, I'm going to stop sharing so I could see everybody, because I can only see Rob and Kendra right now, which is lovely, but I want to be able to see everybody. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides.
Thank you, Rachel. That was super informative and like packed full of good information. And one thing I'll just add at the start, because this is something, despite the fact that our oldest has had type 1, so we've been traveling with diabetes for now, I have to do the math, but like 18 years, not quite 18 years, whatever, it's close, 17 years. And I just learned that and we always struggle because, as you pointed out in your slideshow, you want to keep all of your medical and diabetes supplies in your carry-on and not put them in your packed luggage. And that, especially when when we're going somewhere short distance and it's like, but all of our luggage is full, it's always a little bit of a conundrum. We just have to be really sparse in what we pack to fit all the diabetes supplies. And then I learned recently, and some of our the other parents on here may already know, that you can take an additional carry-on bag for your medical supplies without any additional cost, charge, or anything. You just tell them you have medical supplies, and you can take 2 carry-ons, which is really helpful because we, especially now, I mentioned to Rob and Rachel before we got on that our family is planning, we're going to be abroad for the next year. And this often comes up because it's tricky to pack a year's worth of diabetes supplies, which is usually what we do. We get a year's worth ahead of time so that we just are carrying it with us. And to do that all in carry-on can be really tricky. So I think we're going to be leveraging the additional baggage. But anyway, that's a great tip.
Yeah. And I just actually realized I didn't focus on this a lot, but something I learned in prepping for this talk is you can get loaner insulin pumps. I don't know if anyone, yep, Jeb's like, yep. I did not know that. And specifically, I was looking at T-Slim because I have one. And their recommendation was at least 2 to 3 weeks. I'd probably do it more sooner or earlier than that. But they'll send you an extra pump. And I think there's some information about kind of not opening it, or if it does get opened by TSA, letting them know. And Jeb, I don't know, do you have experience with that?
Yeah, only with Medtronics though, but I assume it's similar. Medtronics, you had to pay a small fee. I think it was $50, and they're required a month in advance, so you really have to be on top of it. But yeah, they don't want you to open it. They want you to tell TSA specifically not to open it. And if they do, they want you to document the moment it happens that it was opened before you send it back. But I do highly suggest getting one if you can, because I have had to use that emergency pump before, and it really, really came in handy.
That's really, really good advice. And you are totally right. I think they want you to almost, was it call immediately? Did you have to call them like right away, Jeb, or did you write?
Yes. They want to know where that thing is at all times, because it's an expensive piece of equipment.
Yeah. I think for the T-Slim, you don't have to pay up front. As long as you kind of follow their procedures and rules, then you won't have to pay at all. But I did read that with the Medtronic, that there was a little bit of a fee. And then I was also reading for Omnipod that they would give another PDM. This was something else I had read too, as long as you reach out ahead of time. So that was really interesting, and something that I also think I should utilize. So learn that kind of in preparation for this talk. One of the other things that I didn't include in my slides, but I don't know if you guys have heard, has anyone heard about the concerns about lows in the air with the pumps and giving extra insulin? Is that something people? Yeah. So I wanted to talk on that.
Only with the Omnipod have I heard people talk about that.
Yeah.
Based on the cabin pressure or something, but I don't have an Omnipod and I haven't experienced that.
Yeah, no, thanks for adding that, because I haven't either. And I was like, you know what, if someone asks me, I want to be prepared to talk on this. And so they did do a study, and they presented it at one of the European conferences, where essentially what they found is that the pump would administer like half a unit at most during takeoff, and then landing may give you like half a unit less. And so they felt like overall, it really wasn't clinically significant unless someone was like extremely sensitive to insulin. But I think someone from the American Diabetes Association, because one of the recommendations was, well, disconnect the pump if you have one, like the Tandem T Slim. But the ADA was like, let's not do that because if you forget to put it back on, then that's a problem. So I did want to just add that I think that there's been a lot of conversation about it, but I think the main takeaway is that it's not significant enough. And I agree with you. I've never had lows that I've felt were due to having the pump on. But again, I realize everyone's experiences might be a little bit different. So another thing I kind of got to research for this talk.
Yeah, Michelle, I see your hand up. You want to chime in?
Yeah, hi. My daughter's newly diagnosed and she's never traveled before. She has a G7 on, no pump yet. We'll get that in a couple months, but I'm just wondering, will the follow app work while she's on the plane? Or should we be concerned? Should she be doing finger pokes on the flight, or what can we expect on her first flight? It's about 6 hours.
Yeah, so follow up is Bluetooth.
It is, okay.
I believe I'm asking because I realize I
Oh.
have not, so on my phone, as long as my Bluetooth and airplane mode is on, it still works. I don't know if anyone can speak to the follow app parents.
The follow app, the follow app works if you're on Wi-Fi. If everything's on Wi-Fi, if you're not, then you just have to use the kid's phone or receiver to look at it.
Awesome.
So we should bring a receiver probably and not just the phone.
Well, if your child has a phone.
Your kid's phone. It'll
Right.
work for the phone that's with the person on the plane. But
Okay.
if you're at home looking at your follow app, you will not
Or
see anything until she's
even if
back
you're
into
sitting right
Wi-Fi or
next to her.
something.
Yeah, even if you're sitting right next to her, it won't be on your phone. It will
Right.
only be on her phone.
Okay. Well, her
That's the
dad's going to be
Bluetooth.
sitting next to her,
Okay.
so I'll be
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Great question.
And then anything else that we should be concerned about on the plane, about highs or lows, or just kind of nervous?
Generally, no. I think, everyone's kind of experience can be a little bit different. Anecdotally, sometimes my blood sugar run a little bit higher just because I'm not as active. So I think just
Okay.
accounting for those changes. But overall, she should totally do fine. And I'm excited that she's traveling. And as we said, the G7 should be good to go.
Okay. Okay.
Through all the
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And
That's what we've experienced too. Like, our kids tend to run a lot higher when flying just because they're sitting for 5 hours, and especially if, well, she's not on the pump right now, so you're not making adjustments. The pumps they handle that a little bit better because they can make adjustments as they start to go
Okay.
high, but that is more of what we've experienced as well, just because they're less active.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add, TSA has the ability, you have the ability to reach out to them in advance. Like, I usually try about a week or so in advance and just tell them when you're flying and which airports. And then you can arrange to meet them outside of security and they walk you right up. You don't have to stand in line. You don't have to do anything. They know that you need special screening. They take care of you. And it is concierge service and is quite honestly one of the best features of having type 1.
Kids 13 and under.
No, I don't know.
That was what I recall.
Oh, okay. I don't know. He's under 13. And so I've done it and it's been fabulous. And then I don't have to worry about it. They expect what we're, going to pull out and everything and all of that stuff. And so it's been really, really helpful.
That is a wonderful tip. Thanks for sharing that because I was not aware of that. So that's pretty awesome.
But something to look into. Like I said, I don't know if they do it for adults, but they certainly do it for children.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, Mandy, I think you had your hand up next.
Hi, nice to meet everybody. I have a 6-year-old who was diagnosed when he was 4, and we've done like traveling to Hawaii and around the States and camping. So I had a comment about the Frio and then also a question with regards to airport security. So the Frio also works really well in cold temperatures. So that's one of the things we use while camping. Because of course, if your insulin gets too cold, it, goes bad as well. So it protects against the warm temperatures as well as the cold temperatures. Like if you were to go to Mount Hood, for instance, and it's really cold outside, you keep it on you in that Frio bag, or if you're camping and it's hot in the day and cold at night. We love those, and it's easy to refresh it after it's been, 45 hours or so. We just do that daily to make sure it stays the right temperature. So love the Frio. The question I did have is if anybody knows whether, going back to special accommodations and TSA, for like larger airports, if it's a lot for, your kid to travel through, and, especially when dealing with a young kiddo walking through the airport, longer concourses, whether there's help or assistance. Is that something you might ever check out a wheelchair or get one of the golf carts to help transport you? Has anyone had experience with that?
Great question. I am curious. I almost want to like look it up while we're here to see. I bet that question's been asked before, and I wonder if in some of the blogs or things online. But maybe even reaching out, as others had said, to TSA or I don't know.
Yeah, I would
We're
say
going to Utah next week, so I was like, oh, I should probably ask because someone mentioned the TSA alert, so that'd be nice.
Yeah, I mean, certainly reach out to them. You can, I think one of the questions on the little form when you go to their website to lodge your travel times and such is if they need extra support like that. I can't remember for sure. We don't use it, so I haven't ever checked it. But I would say if you have any concerns about that, just ask. They will help you. That's what they're there for.
Okay.
And I'll add that I just looked up while we were talking that it's not limited to children 13 and under. Anyone who has any needs, including adults who have either devices that affect your ability to screen or you're traveling with medically necessary liquids, can use the PSA cares form. And I put the link in the chat that has the form that you'd fill out with your flight information and whatnot, and it has that list of kind of what kind of assistance you need, so you can see what is required there, but is available to anyone.
I will say that when you're traveling internationally, this obviously is only stateside. So when we've gone international, we've done the same thing that Dr. Cali does, which is you just go up to their security, whatever their TSA is, and you just say, we have a child with type 1 diabetes. We need special screening. And then they've always handled it really well. So,
and the one thing I'll say is that our kids have, and as Dr. Cali noted, like you don't have to disconnect. Our kids have recently found it faster to disconnect because there have been times where they have stayed connected to their pump and they need to wait for a pat down, and it can be like 5 or 10 minutes of waiting for someone to come and give them a pat down. And if their site is in an accessible location, they find it easier just disconnect, pass them the pump. They carry it outside of the X-ray machine, meet them on the other side, and then they're kind of on their way. So I wish that was always faster, but sometimes they've gotten kind of caught up in delays there. So even though you don't have to, sometimes I feel like they choose to. I have a question, actually. This is something our middle son was, and I know Rob mentioned this when he got on, but I just to reiterate, we have 3 kids and they all have type 1, and so we've done a lot of traveling collectively with them, and he was on his own in Mexico City over spring break, and his he had packed all the extras, like all the extra supplies that he needed, but he packed 3 sensors he was there for 6 days, and it was just one of those days where the first one failed early, the next one fell off the same day he put it on. He just ended up without a sensor, and we were like, well, maybe this is one of when we've been in other countries, we've found it to be so much easier to access diabetes supplies. We're like, maybe this is a case where you may even be able to get it at the pharmacy. And then we learned that Dexcom and G7 is not in Mexico yet. So that was like a non-starter. But I do have a question because, and I just wondered how anyone experiences this, because, when you call for your replacement sensor, or if you call and I'm trying to think of how we handled this when we were in Europe last time for the year, because we too had loaner pumps, but you sometimes have pump problems. and they always ask if the incident happened while you were in the US. And I wondered if anyone experienced, like, if it did not, does that mean they don't give you, like, they don't comp you a sensor? Or, I haven't had this scenario where we have said, no, we're not in the US while this is happening, or have been requesting something. And I just wondered if anyone else had that experience, and what if you're sort of denied because it wasn't on US grounds.
What I learned this year is that I was on the G6. I've just moved to the G7, but with the G6, they will only allow you one extra, sensor, and one extra, what's the other thing I'm trying to think of?
Transmitter.
Oh, and one extra transmitter per year now. They used to freely give them out. I think the out of the country buys you an extra give because you were somewhere, and I'm guessing Mexico is because it's so warm, this tape didn't stick and all that good stuff. I use IV prep wipes on everything now. Gives me a little more
he does
tacky.
too. It just happens.
And then Amazon, and you can get tandem. They're big round discs. They fit perfectly over the G7s.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny you say that about the G6, because actually when we switched to the G7, that's when when we called in to get a replacement, that's when they told us that G7 was much stricter, and you were only, that they were much more limited. You were allowed, I think it was 3 per calendar year. But I don't know how others have experienced. We haven't found them to be that restrictive in fulfilling, like, when we need backups or comps for things that have fallen out. So I was pleased to hear that, because I was worried about that, since and especially with the G7, which hardly ever makes it to 10 days. So many families have to call in for comps. So they must be having to moderate that just based on the performance of the G7.
I agree.
I think one of the other topics that Rob had suggested I'd maybe talk about is Disneyland.
Woohoo!
Well, has anyone had any experience with the DAS pass? Do you know what that is when I say it?
Just being denied it.
Yeah, that's what I read.
It's changed. It's changed recently.
Yes. May 2024, someone said, and feel free to correct me, but I, again, went to the blogs because that's really where the information is. And yeah, it sounds like they're being pretty strict about it now.
We've never been eligible.
Oh, yeah.
We were
We got
before
it
May
one time.
24, and
This
we were denied, like,
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 In 2017 we got it, and it was pretty cool. It's like a fast pass. It was great. So I'm sorry that they've stopped doing that. That's not cool.
Yeah.
I think it might depend on the person that you,
Yeah.
like, it's a person by person thing, and I'm sure they have policy, but then it also is like, depends on who you talk to.
That's what I read, Kendra. Someone recently had gotten approved, and that was kind of their takeaway, is they felt like it was dependent on who they were speaking to. So I think no harm in trying if interested in doing that. But yes, I think the takeaway is most people are getting denied.
Yeah, I wish I had some tips on how I got through it. Maybe it was a year and a half ago with my entire family, and I just felt guilty about doing it the whole time I was there, because it was, they took away the whole fast pass system. So I felt like I was taking advantage. So I'm sympathetic. If there truly is a medical need that you cannot stand in a line for 30 minutes, then by all means do what you got to do. But me just trying to find a shortcut because I was diagnosed with diabetes at some point, I don't know. I get it. They got to manage crowds and people's expectations. But hey, yeah, it's too bad that if people legitimately need that DAS pass has gone away, I think.
I see Eric's hand up.
I wanted to relay an experience we had. We just recently transitioned to the G7 from the G6. And our experience was that after we had the G7, we connected it to an Omnipod. We had the Omnipod to go bad. And then we put another Omnipod, and that went bad. And we ended up calling the Omnipod tech support, and they said it's the sensor.
No, he asked you.
Yeah.
It was the sensor killed the pods. And so Dexcom, or sorry, Omnipod
yeah.
sent us both extra pods and arranged with Dexcom to send us a replacement sensor. But it was an interesting sort of moment that, well, what's funny is we had just been traveling days before this.
We made the original transition while we were on a trip and not realizing that we had to do the, reset the sensor and everything before starting the pod. That was a key.
Yeah.
So we actually kept him in manual mode for the first day and a half or 2 days, thinking that we would, just switch him over and then do it. And we effed it up again. And so we got home, and then I went to change it before we sent him to school the next day. And that's when we literally killed 2 pods in 10 minutes. And we're like, what? And so then I called in, and yeah, they said the sensor was bad. It wasn't going to connect to a pod. And so each time you tried to connect it to the pod, after you've applied it to the child, it then breaks down and gives you
does the screaming,
yes,
the terrible screaming
so,
pods. So
be very careful. There are occasional G7 sensors apparently that are pod killers. And call them. If you have a pod fail and not connect to a sensor, just call them right away. Don't try a second one. I didn't realize it was, not user error on my part. So we went through 2 before we figured it out.
One thing I was going to mention, this is not specific to, it's a little bit of a diversion, but it is travel related, is, and I know we've talked about this on the group, in this group before, but in case there are other people who haven't been on, is that with type 1, you are eligible for the Disabilities National Parks Pass. And so if there's any travel that involves the national parks, you can get, they're eligible for Disability Pass, which lets some members of the family through as well. So that is a really helpful benefit. And that's like lifelong, it's not like you have to keep reapplying. You just get the access pass and have it.
What comes with that, Kendra? Because I'm actually going to a national park here.
I think you have, I'm gonna have to double check, but I think you get free access. I think you don't pay the entry fee. And I think I don't remember, it's like you and everyone in your car. I could look at I happen to have like my daughters, I think, in my wallet, but it's a good deal.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing like a national park trip where the fees can add up over time. And also, I'll just say it's really, like so many, you don't realize how many landmarks are part of the national park system where that access pass actually gets you in. So like things that, historical sites that I wouldn't have remembered were part of the system, gives you access to that as well. The one thing I'd say, just related to, if you're going for a really long period of time, and like, for instance, we typically get our diabetes supplies, our pump supplies on like 3-month rotations. And going abroad, we're planning on trying to get the whole year of supplies up front. And so that's, again, if you end up wanting to do something or just wanting to get even 6 months of supplies, that is something that takes some negotiation with insurance, and so definitely requires time to have that conversation and let them, get through all of the hoops that are required for them to release that much supply to you at once. But it is doable.
It's pretty stressful. I definitely remember traveling a lot with, we don't travel that much. Like once a year, we'll go to like Arizona or something, and that Frio, if you haven't used that Frio pack, it's the savior of, because we were in Arizona for one summer, and it was like, I made my daughter carry a backpack full of ice with insulin inside. It was like dripping behind her at a museum,
Wow.
one of those outdoor museums. She was so mad. It was hilarious. And then someone was like, hey, this thing will, and it's kind of amazing. You don't even have to keep it cold. You don't have to keep it refrigerated or anything. So we have them at camp too, if anybody. We were trying to sell them for a while, but nobody bought them while they were at camp. So we actually have a few in the office. If anybody wants to hit me up, I can send it to you.
And I think today I learned that it keeps it from being too cold also. I guess I never
That's
thought of it that
interesting.
way. That was a really helpful tip also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It was such a thorough presentation. That's the thing. So thorough. And my daughter's going to, along with Jenny, who's she's here too. Our daughters are going to Spain in like 2 days. And that was a coincidence. Oh, there she is. There's Izzy. Yeah, it was a coincidence that we scheduled it for 2 or 3 days before. I should have scheduled it like 6 months before. Because like, are we ready? I don't know. But they're going to go for 9 days for this exchange. It's not an exchange. It's like an educational tour through school, and 9 days. But it's cool that it's the two of them. That's what really makes me feel much more comfortable, because they've both had diabetes since they were little bitty, and they've known each other since they were 5 or 4 maybe, and so they just help each other out, and they're going to watch out for each other. And so very confident in them. They're amazing kids. Also still nervous as a parent, trying to prepare as much as possible, but that is hard.
So that's actually a question. So are your daughters going alone without going in a school group, but without parents, like without you?
Well, yeah, without either of us, right? So there's like a chaperone, and Jenny and I sat down with the chaperone and talked to her about what it was like she's a teacher. So
Okay,
we
yeah.
sat down and chatted with her, and she's very, on top of stuff. But yeah, she's got 6 kids to watch. And then there's other people joining the group from North Carolina. And so yeah, they're 17, so they're, they drive around and stuff. So
Okay.
that's pretty responsible of them.
Okay. Yeah, we're our son, his school has overnight trips starting last year, so in 3rd grade. So for those, we go and we stay nearby, and so we're available should there be pod changes or whatever. But we did a similar download with their teachers, and we stay obviously in contact through the follow app and all that good stuff. But in 8th grade, they have an option to do an international trip for their language classes, and we were just discussing how would we handle that.
Yeah.
Would one of us be going to some Spanish speaking country with them? But I was just wondering if anybody had any experience with that. But it's good to know, at least to your point, by 17, I would hope, she's almost graduating from high school.
Yeah, they're both juniors.
Okay, all right.
Almost. But we'll see how they do.
But hopefully they can put on their own pods and put on their own sensors and all that good stuff.
Yeah, my daughter went to the trip to New York and Washington D.C. in 8th grade. That trip, and that was super stressful. But she did great. Like, it's amazing how when it's up to them to take care of themselves, sort of changed mindset. At least for my kiddo, she changes her mindset, and she does so much better than when she knows we're in the other room, or we're like, hey, did you do insulin? And she's like, oh, whoops. But and I think that I was asking her, and I'm asking Izzy too, watch out for each other, remind each other to do insulin and stuff like that. And in a way you can share your supplies and your both make sure between the two of you, you're not going to forget low supplies on the plane and stuff like that.
That's the trip my daughter's going on, is the DC and New York. So it'll be her first trip after being diagnosed. But we were able to add her dad to the trip after diagnosis. They let us, even though it was
great,
past the
especially
cutoff.
a new diagnosis. That's helpful.
Yeah, and she's only 12, so we just felt better that he went.
Yeah.
So
And that trip does have a lot of walking.
yeah.
Yes, it does. Well, thanks everybody. What an awesome conversation. And Dr. Cali, Dr. Rachael Mullin, thank you so much for joining us and for preparing all of that. And I'm the one who wrote that little blurb about, like, what if you dropped your insulin in Spain? And she took it as a challenge to answer all those questions and really overachiever in answering all the great questions. And really, I mean, what a great guidebook. In fact, she sent me the slideshow 2 days ago, and I sent it to my wife, and we're going through checklisting, like, okay, do we have this? We have that. So yeah, it's just been great. And thank you for sharing the slideshow, and I'll send it to everybody on the call. And everyone else who signed up, just because it's such great information. There's great links, and just the one last link I was going to throw in here was I'll send it in the email to this adapter, because it has, UK has different one than Europe, it has different from us. that you need to charge your pump, you need to have this thing. So it's a neat little adapter, New York Times #1 adapter. It's only $20. So it's like a cube, and it has all of it in one instead of like 10 different adapters. It's all in one. So it's pretty cool. I'll just include that too. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Kendra, for hosting again, and all the families. Thanks, Jeb, for showing up. I asked him last minute to show up because he's traveled a lot too. And I just think it's such an important thing to send your kids out and to take them out and do everything. Because like Rachel said, doesn't, you just have to do a little more planning, but there's nothing that can stop you from going anywhere you want. So anyway, thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, bye-bye.